Jay Gabler, arts and entertainment reporter at the Duluth News Tribune, here with another special episode of the DNT Minute featuring my column, Front Row Seat. This week I wrote about book bans. Book bans are booming. According to the American Library Association, last year saw the highest number of attempted book bans since ALA began compiling data about censorship in libraries more than 20 years ago. The unparalleled number of reported book challenges in 2022 nearly doubles the 729 challenges reported in 2021. I didn't see this coming, and I've spent a lot of time researching and writing about books, specifically children's books, which are the focus of many challenges. From 1999 to 2007, I was a doctoral candidate in sociology at Harvard University. My primary research focus was the social history of children's books and media, and my dissertation was titled From Captains Courageous to Captain Underpants. My research involved poring through decades of articles about children's media, talking with teachers and parents, and reading children's books from the 19th century to the 21st, including many from the University of Minnesota's superb Curlin collection of children's literature. The history of children's books across that span was largely the history of adults going from worrying about what kids were reading to worrying about whether kids were reading. As movies, radio, television, and video games were invented, parents and teachers broadened their notions of what constituted acceptable reading material for kids. In the early 20th century, for example, educators were deeply suspicious of page-turners published in series with recurring characters such as the Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew. Today, those books seem so wholesome, they're downright cheesy, but at the time, those juveniles were described as tawdry and addictive. When Children's Book Week was founded in 1919, the librarian behind it had the goal of getting kids to put down such mile-a-minute fiction and pick up better books. As author Kate Douglas Wiggin put it, "If you find a 12-year-old boy addicted to juveniles, you might as well give the poor little creature up." A few decades later, concerns about juvenile fiction had receded. The chaotic energy and gleefully absurd language of Dr. Seuss would never have passed muster before the invention of TV, which parents and teachers worried would take up all the time children used to spend reading. The Cat in the Hat, they thought, might be able to compete with Howdy Doody. Adults in the 1950s were also concerned about comic books, but by the time I was talking with educators and parents in the early 2000s, they were glad to see kids putting down their Game Boys and picking up anything printed on a page. Librarians who confiscated dime novels in the pre-TV era would have been appalled by the Captain Underpants books, which trade on toilet humor and depict children mocking a school principal. Things were very different by the 2000s, when libraries gladly stocked not only Captain Underpants, but also books like Goosebumps graphic novels. When I sat down with parents and teachers, I asked them outright, what would be an example of a bad children's book? They were stumped. "I haven't seen a bad book for kids," said one parent. "I can't think of what would be a bad book," said another. "Anytime anyone wants to read anything," said a third, "that's great." If you'd asked me what we'd see 15 years later, I would have guessed adults would still be singing the same song, except they'd be complaining about kids hooked on smartphones. A bad book? No such thing. Recently, though, some parents have developed plenty of ideas about what might constitute a bad book. According to the ALA, in 2022, a record 2,571 unique titles were targeted for censorship. What changed? That's a question for today's sociologists to answer. I've traded my American Sociological Association card for a Society of Professional Journalists membership, but I have some ideas. I don't think there's been a fundamental shift in the way most parents think about kids' books and media. Book bans aren't on the rise because adults have changed their mind about Goosebumps and Captain Underpants, let alone The Cat in the Hat. Parents are plenty concerned about the effects of electronic media, especially social media. Social media, though, are also used by adults. Parents who might be disposed to pull certain books from library and school shelves can now organize online, sharing information and developing strategies. Online networks make it easier for people to cluster in like-minded groups, contributing to America's growing political polarization. If there was a way to see the rise in book censorship coming, I might have missed it because I wasn't looking in the right places. That's always a risk with sociology or any science. You only get the answers to the questions you think to ask. For my research, I spoke with parents and teachers in 2 Boston communities, one urban and one suburban. What if I'd gone into a rural community as well? Would people there have been able to answer my question about what a bad children's book might be? According to the ALA, the vast majority of books targeted last year were written by or about members of the LGBTQIA+ community and people of color. Those attempted bans, it seems, may have less to do with what's in the book than with who's in them. Adventures of Huckleberry Finn and To Kill a Mockingbird were removed from Duluth Public Schools' English curricula in 2018 due to concerns over content, including the repeated occurrence of racial slurs in books written by white authors. Removing a book from a required list of school reading, though, is much different than removing it from shelves altogether. Also, the decision to change that reading list was made for a different reason than the one that motivates most book bans today. In a statement accompanying the report on 2022 book challenges, ALA Office for Intellectual Freedom Director Deborah Caldwell-Stone said such bans are typically attempts to suppress the voices of those traditionally excluded from our nation's conversations, such as people in the LGBTQIA+ community or people of color. The community members behind book bans are presumably also concerned about what their kids are seeing on YouTube and Snapchat, but the reality is that it's easier to ban a book than to ban something online. A book is a physical object that sits there on a shelf. It's there because a librarian or teacher put it there, and that person's boss is much easier to pressure than, say, Mark Zuckerberg. Back in the 1800s, the job of children's librarian hardly even existed. Children's libraries had to be built from scratch, and the first people who worked there weren't exactly anti-censorship crusaders. An 1880s children's librarian in Rhode Island, for example, prided herself on destroying stories of the dime novel order with their cops and robbers plots. Children's libraries, both in schools and in public spaces, have changed a lot. Librarians and educators have worked hard for more than a century to build up a large selection of books that give kids access to the wide world of knowledge, and have stopped shaming books that are simply fun to read. The value today's parents and book professionals place on reading isn't just about the importance of literacy. It also reflects the high quality of the books available to any child who walks into a building like the free Duluth Public Library. For as long as anyone alive today can remember, librarians and other professionals have largely been trusted to stock their shelves with books that will help kids understand their world and feel seen as human beings. Today, an increasing number of people want to limit who can be seen on those shelves. The parents and teachers I spoke with for my research may sometimes have wished they could turn back the clock to a time before video games or TV. In some ways, the clock does now seem to be turning back, but it's not TV that's disappearing, it's books. That's this week's column. I'll be back next week. Not sure yet what my column will be about, but I'll give you a hint. I'm thinking about writing about something really boring. Until then, I'm Jay Gabler, Duluth News Tribune.